the 4 main deck Hims, main deck Jace here. And then other than that, a very redundant list. 4 Deathrite, 4 Delver, 4 Tarmogoyf, 1 Sylvan Library, an Abrupt Decay, 4 Abrupt Decay, 4 Brainstorm, 4 Daze, 4 Force of Will, only 3 Ponders.
Wow, this is exactly what you're talking about. You said a lot of these decks seem beholden to a lot of 4-ofs. Richard Shay definitely knows what he wants and has a lot of those spells.
Well, the 1-ofs that I like in his deck are high impact and situational or not easy to cast. So Sylvan Library, not very good in multiples, not good in every matchup. Jace the Mind Sculptor, a little bit on the expensive side. Also, when you're playing Wastelands in your own list, there's only so many Jaces you want to have. The 1 Dimir Charm, probably don't want to draw 2 of those in too many games, I would assume. So makes a lot of sense there. In the sideboard, you see 2 copies of Grafdigger's Cage, a Null Rod, a Pithy Needle, a Sylvan Library, 2 Disfigures, a Flusterstorm, 2 Golgari Charm, 2 copies of Submerge, 2 Vendilion Clicks, and a Jace the Mind Sculptor. Richard with a healthy amount of anti-control action he can bring in. The 2nd copy of Jace, the 2 Vendilion Clicks, the 2nd Sylvan Library, a Pithy Needle to fight over Sensei's Divining Top, and a Flusterstorm if he wants more anti-spell action. So really solid sideboard for the matchup.
Yeah, we did see Needle for the top. How do you feel about going as far as boarding in Null Rod? Top is a really important card to the Miracles deck.
1 Null Rod feels a little on the narrow side to me, but it still may be warranted given what's going on here.
All right, on the other side, Brian, I have to imagine, is going into his anti-creature package again. We look at the sideboard here. He's got, well, anti-blue at least. He has Pyroblast. We already thought Rest in Peace can be pretty good against a Bug Delver deck. We've seen him in the past boarding cards like Humility, additional Stoneforge Mystics, the 2nd Batterskull. These have usually come in against aggressive strategies.
Brian kind of goes into more of a traditional Stoneblade board control shell here in the post-board games against all but the most combo-ish of combo decks from what I've seen. So I suspect he's going to bring in the Stoneforge package that you alluded to. Richard, not that well-equipped like most Bug decks to be the Batterskull, so it's an easy path to victory for Brian. And then Humility, the Pyroblast, all that kind of stuff's going to come in as well.
And we see here, Brian will be on the play again game 2. He was on the play game 1. It's not so important that Brian's on the play as much as that he takes Richard off the play in this matchup.
Yes. That's the big thing. A lot of these games get determined on the first 2 turns. Now, that's odd to say coming off the heels of a 30-minute game that Richard won, but when Richard gets out in front and is able to hold up his shield of counter spells or discard spells or what have you, Brian's floundering with less efficient resources or things that are more situational or more contextual. When Brian gets out in front, his cards are so much more powerful that it's hard for Richard to catch up.
Yeah, one thing we saw in the top 8 match between Brian Braun-Duin and Jacob Wilson was that in the end of the day, Blue, White, Red Delver was just this 11 creature deck, and Brian was able to just use really efficient removal to take care of all of Jacob's early game and then really coast through the late game. I would think it's the same plan against Bug Delver, but it seems like it's going to be a little bit harder to execute.
Part of that is the fact that Richard has access to very powerful planeswalkers that are capable of winning the game. 2 copies of Liliana, and I would presume 2 copies of Jace the Mind Sculptor in the post-board games. That gives Richard an extra element attack that Jacob did not have in the quarterfinal match.
All right, we are underway. Brian, turn 1 on the play. Just going to make a basic, no top. He has kept a mostly reactive hand, Swords to Plowshares, Counterspell. Only 1 other land in his hand, but he does have a Brainstorm to go with it, so he'll be able to replace some of these cards. On Richard's side, we'll see what early action he has. It looks like he also has a fairly blue-heavy hand, maybe also on the control route of things. He's just going to ponder on his first turn.
3 ponders is not something you see in a lot of these lists, but I kind of like it.
Yeah, normally that's a standard 4 of in these decks.
Yeah. It's a lot less powerful than Brainstorm, and I kind of like having a little bit more action when Thalia is all over the place.
I would imagine as the matchup gets, as your deck gets slower, as like matchups get slower, you know, your deck has Lilianas, Jaces. Like Ponders to me seem like they'd be in the deck to help power up your Delvers and your fast starts. As you care less about Delvers and care more about the late game, Ponders probably starts to lose some of its value.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Brian goes with the end step Brainstorm, just wanting to replace some of his dead cards. Because it's on the end step, he'll only get to replace 1 card. But he's going to crack Arid Mesa for a 2nd basic and tap for the Stoneforge Mystic he was able to find off that Brainstorm.
And this is the conversion that we talked about in sideboarding games. It's hard to just hold off Richard forever trying to spin tops and Terminus a bunch of times and eventually get to Entreat. But Stoneforge Mystic makes it really easy.
And Stoneforge Mystic, Richard will have none of that. I think it's exactly what you alluded to here. It's going to get forced. So Richard's going to keep the board clear right now, but at a pretty big cost as he had to pitch Brainstorm.
And so, Brian, even though the Stoneforge doesn't resolve, this is a big payout for the way that he sideboarded. Most 2-mana spells don't warrant a Force of Will here. It's basically only counterbalance.
Yeah, 1-for-1ing seems to be Brian's game plan, and now he got to have a 2-for-1 as that Force of Will was cast. We are back on Richard, though. Shields are down. We'll see what he gets to resolve. You see Delver of Secrets and Brainstorm hiding out in his hand right now. We'll see where it goes. It's going to be a fetch land starting the turn. Seems to be no interest in Brainstorm. He wants to put a threat down.
He needs to get something going. You know, time is not on his side here.
If you look at Brian, it looks like not only does he have a third land, but he has another Stoneforge Mystic coupled with Swords to Plowshares and Jace. He is ready to fight this battle.
Yeah, he can go long, definitely. So Richard's got to do a lot in probably this turn and the next to have a shot.
All right. Richard going ahead and getting another Underground Sea. Not opting for green mana yet. We'll see what he does with this. He does have a lot of single blue going on here.
Yeah, he's both Delver Secrets and Brainstorm.
And I'm wondering if we're going to see a Hymn to Turok, and that is what we'll see. This could do a lot of damage. We'll see what he hits off Brian. Brian with a 5-card hand. Among them, his third land, a Stoneforge, a Swords, a Jace.
They're all good cards. I mean, Brian's hand's very good, so there's no way for this Hymn to really miss.
I mean, I think the third land has got to be the prize in this hand. See if he can get the land and the Stoneforge, I was like, that'd be perfect. He got half of that. He got the Stoneforge and the Swords.
But I'm sure those are two cards that Richard is thrilled to see hit the graveyard.
Both of them really good against him. It was Brian's proactive game plan and his answers to Richard's threats. So now Brian plays a third land. He has another land. He's putting a lot of pressure on this Jace to get him into the game.
And those two cards were probably the cards that Brian wanted for turn 3 to bridge the gap to Jace the Mind Sculptor. Now things have gotten much more complicated.
Yeah, if there's a counter war over this Jace, Brian's not really equipped to fight it. Richard, but before making a land drop, he's going to go for Brainstorm here.
Well, before Brian could just easily win with the Stoneforge Mystic, and Jace a nice backup plan. Now Jace is the plan.
Looks like his remaining card is Vendilion Click, and he does not click in response to this Brainstorm, and he may pay a price for it. You see another Hymn to Turok entering Richard's hand.
You can tell Richard's an old school player here with 4X hymns. That's how you know.
Putting him back, and I imagine he will just fire off another one here. Cracking Verdant Catacombs, and Brian not going to give him the opportunity. Now that he has priority, looks like he's going to flash that Vendilion Click into play, and I don't think he's going to nab that Hymn to Turok.
Well, with Jace the Mind Sculptor and land left in hand, him's got to go.
You don't want to be left with just 3 lands, V-Click, no hand. That is not where Miracles likes to play from.
Him is brutal against Brian. It's so good against Brian. I mean, his hand for this matchup was about as good as you can ask for, really. Stoneforge, Brainstorm, Plow, Stoneforge, Vendilion Click, Jace, 4th land. May not be good enough, and that's almost all Hymn to Turok.
So we look at the hand. Remember, there's a Verdant Catacombs on the stack. Richard with Ponder, Abrupt Decay, Deathrite Shaman, and as you said, Hymn to Turok. Brian takes the Hymn very quickly. So it goes on the bottom, Richard draws, now he gets to search off that Verdant Catacombs. And he does have to remember to search out that land here.
Yeah, this came, yes.
Yeah, remembering, yep, okay, now he goes to get his land.
Yeah, didn't pass priority, totally fine.
Sometimes you forget the stacks in Legacy can get really big to the point where you kind of forget where you were, and you have to get your bearings after a bunch of spells.
And in fact, in the quarterfinals, I was watching where Richard and his opponent, there was some issue with Vendilion Click, a fetch land, things entering play, Judge came over, et cetera, et cetera. So not the first time in this elimination rounds there's been some hiccups. So I'm sure Richard being extra cautious because he may be on the verge of receiving a second warning.
All right, so now he has his green mana. It's Bayou that he found. He cannot go for the Hymn to Turok, but what he can do is he can throw out some 1-drops. We're going to see both Delver of Secrets and Deathrite Shaman on the board.
And these two plays really put pressure on Brian's Jace. It's not clear that can be deployed next turn.
All right, Brian's going to take, we'll untap. We'll see what he does with it. He had a fetch land and Jace when he started this turn. And looks like Caracas was the draw. So it's just 2 lands Jace right now.
Caracas is a good draw here, though. He knows he's playing against the Abrupt Decay. So I guess he's willing to put shields down this turn.
Yeah, the way he can save the Jace, and that's exactly it. He knows Abrupt Decay will hit the V-Click. He goes ahead and unsummons the Delver of Secrets. He does not want it to flip and be able to kill his Jace. Jace may have to go down to 1 this turn if Deathrite wants to hit it, but as far as he knows, Jace will stay alive.
He'll get at least 1 Brainstorm. That's the floor, so.
And we go back to Richard. He still has that Ponder and Delver, which we know about. Got to add a card to the mix here. And Abrupt Decay. So he has answers, but nothing for the Jace yet.
If he's on the fence about Abrupt Decay before, he has to in the face of this Caracas.
Yeah, if he lets that get to that combo be assembled by Brian, it's going to be a lot harder to take down the Jace later on. So you see Abrupt Decay on the Vendilion Click. Deathrite Shaman in play. Maybe going to go after the Mind Sculptor, putting him down to 1. We'll see what he picks there. He also may be used as a land if Richard just wants to throw out some more spells.
It's a big risk not knocking this down to 1. I mean, you knock Jace down to 1. You have 2 creatures in play. You'll probably be able to kill it next turn. You get fancy here, and Jace might run away with the game.
Yeah, and he does exactly that. Didn't want to spend the time pondering. He puts Jace down to 1 with Deathrite Shaman, plays Delver. You're right, 2 creatures which are both lethal to Jace, and that's going to force Brian to brainstorm for an answer. Jace is so good. Just
yeah, it's not shabby.
Draws into his Swords to Plowshares. Well, I'll take care of one of them. I don't know if he has a way for the second creature to get rid of the second creature. So the Mind Sculptor may be going down here. He's going to keep Swords, Fetch Land, and Counterspell.
Yeah, it was what a disappointing Jace. It was only unsummoned, brainstorm, contorted Richard's play.
It only turned your land into a Counterspell and a Swords to Plowshares and gave you a reset.
Yeah. And that's a disappointing Jace.
Yeah,
that's a low impact
Jace. Because it's going to die. I mean, he can't do it again next turn.
Because it doesn't just win the game outright.
So the Delver of Secrets flipped off Force of Will. Brian actually let Richard draw the Force of Will. Not too worried about it because he does have Counterspell right now. Both creatures sent to Jace, playing around their removal spell. Brian, no need to Swords now. He's not going to save the card. He's going to wait to do that maybe on end step. And Richard will go for a Ponder.
Maybe a better target will present itself.
And in response to the Ponder, Brian doesn't want the Swords getting countered. He's going to go ahead and Swords away the Insectile Aberration. Buys himself a lot of time to find more play.
Yes. Although he is now kind of running low. I mean, this Counterspell trades with something, but Richard's deck a lot more threat dense than Brian's, of course.
And as he knows, there is a Swords to Plow, or a Force of Will, rather, in Richard Shay's hand. So as soon as Richard finds another blue card, which he may off this Ponder, that Counterspell not even guaranteed to get its 1-for-1.
You can also see the pacing of this game, why Brian likes the Stoneforge package here in these matchups. Batterskull is a totally fine draw from this spot.
See, the draw was Delver of Secrets. So second creature into play. Brian's going to snap Counterspell it. Needs to buy time.
Yeah, needs a lot more time. And he's under very little pressure right now. He's at 18. And Deathrite's very good here, but not the fastest clock.
And so now Brian, no cards here. He's going to go ahead and make sure to crack that Flood's Hand. Remember, the top 2 cards of his deck were not winners at the moment. Getting another Volcanic Island, and now he's playing off the top.
Some powerful draws here still. Just the Mind Sculptor, Stoneforge, Mystic, Vendilion Click.
I think Sensei's Divining top is among his best draws here.
Yes.
You know, this is the kind of game that if this was the exact same board and Brian had top in play, we'd probably say, wow, what a favorite Brian is to win it.
Yeah, he has a huge edge in that world. Do you think there's a chance Brian didn't bring in Pyroblast? We've been going, I mean, he's seen a lot of cards here and we still haven't seen any copies. It's not unreasonable, right? I mean, a lot of Richard's best cards here are green and or black.
Yeah, if Richard's on a heavy Hymn to Turok plan.
Richard does not even hesitate. Does not hesitate to force that.
I said, well, wouldn't it be good if he drew this Divining top? Well, that takes care of all the cards in Richard's hand. All right, well, can he do it again? Can he draw another top? Well, probably not yet. And Shay's going to go to work on Brian's graveyard. Takes care of a Swords to Plowshares. And Brian, he drew a Swords. He'll go ahead and Swords Deathrite. And we're even now.
Yeah, now Richard with Tarmogoyf, that's a great draw. As I wasn't not actually a called shot there. Liliana the Veil.
Oh, land for Brian.
Do a quick price check on this Tarmogoyf here. There's a Planeswalker in the graveyard. I imagine land, sorcery, creature, instant. Yes, 5/6.
3-turn clock.
Any artifacts?
Oh yeah, as well. We had a countered Sensei's Divining Top.
Oh,
That's
you're right.
Yeah, that's a 6/7 Tarmogoyf. 6/7 for 2.
That's a good deal.
It's a little above the curve. All right, 6 damage knocks Brian down to 9, and Deathrite Shaman joins the team. Brian gonna be searching for something like Terminus. Let's see, set aside 4. This may be a Jace, and it is. The Mind Sculptor shows up. Normally a pretty good threat here. He's gonna go ahead and bounce the Tarmogoyf here.
Trying to set the same sequence as he had last time, where he unsummons. Richard presumably knocks this down to 1, and then Brian gets to Brainstorm next turn.
All right, Richard just recasts the Tarmogoyf now with 2 cards in hand. Brian draws 1. He does have an uncracked fetch land, so this Brainstorm will get a lot of value. We see Rest in Peace.
Oh boy, Rest in Peace is a big one.
Preordain, a land, a Pyroblast, so he does have them in. And how good is Rest in Peace here?
The biggest threat, I mean, next turn, Brian was potentially looking at lethal. And instead now the biggest threat is gone. Deathrite Shaman still can finish off Jace next turn, but this is a great start for Brian.
Put 2 back, and he still has plays. He can crack a fetch land. He can preordain. He might even be able to keep this Jace.
Well, I think that his best sequence from here is to set these back, crack his Scalding Tarn to get a fresh shuffle. If he is able to find a removal spell off of this preordain, then things become very easy. He gets to go ahead, find a removal spell for the Deathrite Shaman, play Rest in Peace, shut off the Tarmogoyf, and now Jace is in play at 1, and Brian can start drawing a bunch of cards.
Remember, so that Rest in Peace, as we saw here, it's going to put basically eliminate Tarmogoyf, kill the Tarmogoyf. It'll make Deathrite Shaman just into a 1/2, so almost a sweeper here. Kind of a pseudo sweeper. Leaves the creatures on the board, just makes them really bad.
Yeah.
So
a lot of big draws in a row for both of these players.
Yeah, I was going to say from an empty board state, we got back to having threats on both sides real quick. All right, and new deck. We will see what he can preordain into. That's going to be the play for Brian. He sees a fetch land. It's another land. Those are both going to the bottom. Does he draw removal? Can he save the Mind Sculptor? And I think it maybe Stoneforge Mystic is the draw.
Oh, and that's
just wow. Maybe. We'll see. Rest in Peace is the first play here. This may be the bait spell, if he does have a Stoneforge. It's going to resolve. So Tarmogoyf now is 0/1, and yes, here's the real prize, Stoneforge Mystic.
And even just a 1/2 is an awesome draw for Brian here for protecting Jason. Stoneforge, quite a bit more than a 1/2.
So how good is Jace the Mind Sculptor? Look at that sequence of plays that Brian, on an empty board, facing down Deathrite Shaman and Tarmogoyf, just plays Jace, and off that is able to do everything, basically take over the game.
And this is only a medium quality Jace.
Right.
Could have even been better, you know?
You know, and that's really kind of what says it. Like 4-mana sorcery spells, the bar for being able to play a 4-mana sorcery speed card in Legacy is really high, that like Jace is one of the only cards that can get over that bump.
Yeah. The competition is stiff.
I'm trying to think of there are hardly any 4-mana sorceries outside of Jace that see too much play. You can count Tendrils, but that's not really fair.
Yeah, Tendrils is kind of a different thing. Sneak Attack. They all kill people,
yes,
basically.
They all say, it's just the other ones that are 4-mana sorceries say win the game on them in their deck, and you could make an argument like Jace isn't too far from that.
Right.
Delver of Secrets was a play for Richard Shay, so it's a creature with power. It may be able to take down Jace. However, the damage has been done here. Stoneforge Mystic found Batterskull.
Brian just figuring out how to tap here.
And he has another Stoneforge. That was his draw for the turn. He's going to go ahead and find another Batterskull. Remember, he has 2 of them after sideboarding.
This is a defining element of the way that Brian has built this deck and sideboard, and it is coming to bear right now. Most of the time, that one Batterskull is gone, and that's something you don't have to worry about for the rest of the game. And now Richard's up against it next turn.
Yeah, and Richard with all his... I mean, he only plays 3 different creatures. He has them all in play. Rest in Peace, a really powerful weapon against Bug Delver. as it really turns off 2 of his creatures, leaving him with just Delver's secrets to win the game.
It's not a primary part of his game plan. If it doesn't resolve, Brian's got other tools, but it makes life a lot easier in the games it does.
All right, and you see there, Brian goes ahead and puts in that Germ token on his turn. Doesn't really... I would normally say if he didn't have the second Batterskull, I'd say he's playing around a Vendilion Click. He has 2 of them, so not doing that as much. And we'll see that go to work real shortly here. Delver did not flip on Richard Shay's side. He does have him to Turok, so he's going to get the other Batterskull from Brian.
No, that Batterskull got I mean, the second Stoneforge just deployed that.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Okay. He gets a Spell Pierce out of Brian's hand.
Much less impressive.
Much less impressive. You're right. Wasteland takes care of Caracas. But Richard's out of cards, and Brian still has a 4/4 lifelink.
And Jace.
And, oh yeah, and Jace.
And Jace.
He's still there. You activate Jace for, I believe, the 4th time. And you see Jace is drawing him into all sorts of lock pieces. Counterbalance now in his hand. Richard with no cards. Brian ahead on the board. And he has reached that critical point in the game where he starts to put things away.
He can start attacking now. He has a Vendilion Click here also, which can block the Delver Secrets in the event that it flips and further protect the Jace.
All right, so Germ swings for 4. Richard's down to 15. He has 4 turns remaining before he has to start chump blocking here. Richard can prolong the game for a while, but it's questionable whether or not he can make any progress.
There's too many things in play he has to answer now. You know, he probably can't function with Rest in Peace in play. The counterbalance is a long-term issue. Jace is a huge issue. The Batterskull is a huge issue. Vendilion Click's a huge issue. And he only has 1 draw step a turn. So the math just doesn't quite work out.
Vendilion Click cast by Brian as Richard draws a card. It's his own Vendilion Click. He will cast it in response to get it out on the table. The right play not sure how much it helps him here. Neither player with a hand, so it's just going to be a 3/1 flyer. No trigger doing nothing here. Back to Brian's turn, and he's going to continue brainstorming, continue pulling farther ahead. You see another Vendilion Click drawn off that. A slew of lands. He's going to put some of those back, and the Germ will just continue beating into Richard.
One could argue that Stoneforge for Batterskull was excessive in Standard, since it's quite good in Legacy, and actually Batterskull by itself is pretty good in Legacy.
Yeah, that was one of the better Standard decks we've had. I remember...
While we're on the topic
of things...
Of understatements.
God. I remember that when we had Cobblade in Standard, I remember having the banning that Stoneforge Mystic and Jace the Mind Sculptor were banned from Standard, playing a Standard PTQ the next weekend, and Blue-White Squadron Hawks won.
Yep.
And I'm thinking, oh, okay, wait. Cobblade just lost the 2 best cards in his deck, and it still won the PTQ.
Plus, its 2 best cards, which happen to be 2 cards that are Legacy-defining cards.
Right. I mean, these cards are like top 10 in Legacy. I remember when they had Pro Tour Philadelphia, the first Modern Pro Tour, originally was going to be extended instead of Modern. And at the time, I remember testing for it and people said the complaint was that there would be no deck other than this in that Pro Tour. This was the time, remember, extended Mental Misstep wasn't even banned. People were saying this extended deck is better than Legacy decks at the time.
Yeah. So Richard with a second flyer here, finally able to get that Jace off the table. But that is only step 1 of many. An Abrupt Decay revealed to the Delver. That's step 2. Then all he needs to do is a million other things, and he's right back in it.
Yeah, he has to Abrupt Decay the Counterbalance, and find a way to get the Batterskull off the board. That one's going to be harder.
Yeah, no Crozan Grips in Richard's sideboard. That's the most obvious card that these decks go to try to fight this kind of board position.
Yeah, otherwise what he has to do is he could try to kill all of Brian's creatures and then get it with a V-click when he bounces it. I mean, he's so many cards away from doing that, however. All right, so Abrupt Decay is going to hit Rest in Peace, actually, instead. And I like that. I would like that if Brian weren't gaining a ton of life. But, so Goy slowly growing again. He's back up to 1-2. He said a lot of pieces have to come off the board here.
Yeah. I mean, Richard is close to dying, in fact. he is making a game of it. He is doing what he can, but Brian's just too far ahead on resources.
Yeah. Brian down to 17. Richard swung with Vendilion Click. Brian goes ahead and takes it, plays a Vendilion Click of his own, sees the card in Richard's hand, and I believe he could just move Batterskull over and win the game here.
Yep.
Looks like the play he's going to make. 5, throws it over to the flyer. That should swing across in the sky for exactly 7, and we are on to game 3.
And like I said, it felt a lot about what happened in the first 2 turns of the game. We're going to kind of define it. Richard did not get off to a particularly explosive start. Now, there was a lot of top decks back and forth in that mid game, but Richard was not able to get off to the jump that he needed.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, it felt like a comeback to me. There was this point where Richard him to Turok'd Brian earlier on, and I thought we were going to see a 2-0 here. Brian was behind on the board. I remember he had no hand, was facing down a Tarmogoyf and a Deathrite Shaman, was able to top deck a Jace, and that Jace did work. Unsummoned the Tarmogoyf, went to 1, then brainstormed him into all the answers he needed.
The problem is that the top of Brian's deck offers a lot of gas. I mean, you go down this list here, it's all power, Stoneforge Mystic, Terminus, Swords to Plowshares, Sensei's Divine Top, Counterbalance, Jace the Mind Sculptor. When he draws a spell in those spots, it's really hard for it to be something that doesn't dramatically impact the game. So Richard needs to start very aggressive here to prevent the game from getting to that spot. Richard has a couple tools of his own. If the game drags out, the 2 Lilianas he has in his deck, his own 2 copies of Jace the Mind Sculptor. But he's definitely outclassed on that front.
Yeah, so it seems like going into the late game, he wants to make sure he's ahead by a reasonable amount. We saw there he was ahead modestly. He did have that Tarmogoyf going, but yeah, Brian can pull back into a lot of games unless Richard really can get him out of them.
Right.
Game 3, we'll see Richard on the play. He has not been on the play yet. He was remember, Brian's our overall #1 seed, so was on the play both games 1 and 2.
I think even the difference between turn 1 land creature versus turn 1 land card drawing spell is enough to define a lot of these games when Richard's on the play.
How often would you say then Richard can do that tempo game and just stop Brian from playing?
A fair amount of the time. It's something he's pretty well suited to do. He has a lot of cheap creatures. He has ways to protect them. Even his 1 of Dimir Charm, though it's kind of funky, counters a lot of the stuff in Brian's deck. So he has the tools to do so, and him can be really disruptive too. There's not a lot of consistency there, obviously, but nearly everything in Brian's deck is either a very good spell or a critical land, so it's hard to miss with him by too much.
Yeah, and we see the players going on to game 3.
And in fact, a turn 2 Liliana of the Veil is something I believe Brian is pretty hard pressed to stop. He's got 2 copies of Spell Pierce, probably still in the deck. He's got his Force of Wills, some number of them, not even clear he has that many of those cards left.
Yeah, once it's down, how can Brian answer Liliana?
He has a copy of Council's Judgment in his main deck, a second one on the sideboard. And besides that, I mean, it's, he can try to fight it with Vendilion Click and that sort of thing, but it's a challenge.
Absolutely. So the fact that Richard has some of those will certainly could help him in the matchup. It'd be interesting. You could see him turbo into it. Something like just turn 1 Deathrite, turn 2 Liliana.
Yeah, he has access to that sort of draw, and when he has that, if that's backed up by his soft permission, then Brian's in a ton of trouble.
All right, both players here still shuffling up for the match. So early on, if you're Richard, you're looking for a fast start, but it seems like you almost want these Deathrite starts more than something like Delver. It seems like Brian can answer Delver with something like Swords, whereas, or a couple turns down the road, Brian can take a few hits, answer Swords, whereas the damage that Deathrite can do when he just ramps out these early threats can put it away. Particularly
with the Planeswalkers. Brian's deck, not really a lot of answer to those cards, just a couple copies of Council's Judgment. Engineered Explosives can answer it if it's Liliana the Veil. He can try fighting it with creatures, but he is a little susceptible. Sometimes you see Detention Sphere type of cards floating around in Miracles to catch up on Planeswalkers. Brian with no such tool.
Yeah, so no catch-all here, but what he does have is he does have an aggressive game plan. If there's an early, unlike most Miracles decks, if there's an early Planeswalker, Brian can try to Stoneforge Mystic. He can try to Vendilion Click it. That's a card which we see in most Miracles decks. But especially with his 4 Stoneforge Mystic plan, like you said, he's kind of this hybrid between Miracles and Stoneblade.
And it's so much faster to the board, Like Jill Lisette, for example, plays with Entreat the Angels Abundance. Brian does not have that in his list. And Stoneforge is so much faster to the board. You know, the Entreat's very powerful, of course, but it compounds the problem of when you're on the back foot, do you have ways to catch up? What happens when you don't have Swords of Plowshares in your opening hand and you're on the draw? Do you just fall behind too fast? Whereas Stoneforge is, as we saw in that game, very, very easily able to win the game on its own. Especially against Bug, because that's the deck that has the most trouble in my mind answering Batterskull, because its premier removal spell is Abrupt Decay.
All right, so here we are. We are on game 3. Brian surveying his hand, a lot of lands. He does have a Pyroblast. He has a counterbalance. But I have to imagine he'll probably keep it based on those cards, as long as he can cast them.
Well, he has a Pyroblast and no red mana, and I believe his mana is Tundra Plain, so he can't cast Counterbalance, and he's at risk of getting Wastelanded, but it looks like Brian's going to keep it.
All right, turn 1 by Richard Shay. It's a land, but no spell at all, but the players are going to trade lands. That's a bullet dodged there by Brian.
For sure.
See Richard with a, looks to be a land heavier hand. He plays Tarmogoyf on turn 2. And it looks like Richard's kept his hand based on the strength of, I think, his more disruptive elements. Cards like, he has a Force of Will. I believe he has a Hymn to Turok.
Yeah.
All right. Plains down for Brian. No other plays from him. You're right, he does not have the red mana for the Pyroblast. I don't even know if he has any other land at the moment. We do see Council's Judgment in his hand, so he has a catch-all right now, but could be in a tough spot.
His hand's a bit of a mess. I mean, he kept a 2-lander on the draw here. Doesn't look like there's any cantripping going on here. If Richard had one of his Wastelands, this could have been a really ugly game. As it stands, Brian still needs to draw something very good on the 3rd turn here to be able to keep up.
And we'll see how much pressure Richard puts on him. Right now, actually, Brian's hand not, like, if Richard's on the plan of him to Turoking him, that's actually decent for Brian. His hand's not, that's not what's going to make him win or lose, as to whether or not when he draws the land, whether he has 6 cards or 4 cards.
And Brian has a Spell Pierce, too. I think Brian will Spell Pierce it because what else is he going to Spell Pierce if it comes down to him? But I don't think he minds getting a hint here at all because he doesn't really have much in the way of good cards.
And even better, Richard's going to go for Liliana of the Veil. That Spell Pierce will be really strong here. Does Richard want to fight over it?
Oh, if he has Force of Will, I think he's going back at him.
All right, Force of Will pitching days for Richard. We'll see if it does work. It's going to counter the Spell Pierce. Does Liliana resolve? Can Brian force back? The answer is an emphatic no. Liliana is on the board.
I think Richard is going to just start the plussing here. He's got his aggression and he's got his disruption.
As you said, though, Brian had one main deck way to get that Liliana off the board, and it's in his hand. He does have the Council of Judgment right now.
But he also needs to answer the Tarmogoyf, and he needs to draw land, so.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that have to happen here. I mean, as we said before, first one, draw the land. You see he's going to discard Counterbalance. No sense in counterbalancing when you're really far behind on the board. You can redraw that one later. Richard gets rid of Abrupt Decay, as Brian really doesn't have permanence.
And that Abrupt Decay might have actually been good this game because Brian does have his Engineered Explosives.
And it looks like the second Council Judgment drawn by Brian. No 3rd land. EE will come down for 2. It can take care of Tarmogoyf, but Liliana's creeping closer to ultimate. Richard may even have a way to answer the Engineered Explosives. We will see here as Richard continues to press his advantage with a Brainstorm.
Probably on the hunt for an Abrupt Decay here.
Yeah, doesn't want to lose his only source of damage. Liliana's doing a lot of work, but as we know, Brian's not that far. He can take some hits from Tarmogoyf. He can Council's Judgment to Liliana, then blow up the Tarmogoyf. He does have the weapons here he needs to clean up the board. Well, at least he does right now. Hymn to Turok's going to take some of them.
And this is brutal here. I mean, I don't know how many more of these Tarmogoyf hits Brian can afford to take, and answering either of these permanents is his whole turn.
Council's Judgment and Pyroblast taken there.
I'm sure Brian is thrilled to lose that. I guess the Pyroblast would have just been lost to Liliana regardless.
All right, and we'll go ahead and if he ups the Liliana, Brian discards a counter spell. He's discarding a lot of his reactive cards here. You know, he needs the removal, not counters.
I'm pretty sure the only reason he's holding on to the Batterskull here is because he doesn't want to put an artifact in the graveyard. I think he's pretty much married to, you know, I'm going to try to Council Judgment as Liliana, Engineer Explosives away the Tarmogoyf, and hope to play a game from there.
Draw for the turn. It is an Arid Mesa, so he has his land. He has to decide which one's the more pressing threat. Sometimes you actually let your opponent take their Liliana all the way up to lethal because, remember, they have to discard cards to it too. However, Richard's almost out of cards here. I think he wants to just get rid of Liliana while he can.
He can play every card he draws here from now on. None of it's really situational. I guess there's some counter spells maybe he can draw, but...
Yeah, also, Richard doesn't have a counterspell right now, so his Consul's Judgment is safer. Engineer Explosives obviously can't be countered because it's already on the board.
And, you know, it's worth noting, if he cancels Judgments here, the Liliana, he Engineer Explosives next turn, not out of the question that the Batterskull left over in Brian's hand could be deployed in the near future and ultimately win the game.
And we'll see here. Council Judgment is going to vote for Liliana. That's going to take her out. Just Charmgrave remains on Richard's side. Starting out of the EE for 2, it looks like Brian has stabilized.
Well, we'll see. Richard has kept 2 on top, and we'll see if he shuffles here or not, or if he's looking for a new one.
How many of those cards were winners? The one you leave on top, is it good enough?
Now, he took the land off the Brainstorm because he just wanted to empty out his hand. He wanted to play a land, cast him, and then plus Liliana. So it's possible there was gas left on top of his deck there, but I guess Richard feels differently here. You can see the top 2 cards were Hymn to Torak and Dimir Charm. Not that much help here.
Yeah, neither of those actually solve the problem of Richard losing all his threats. Brian with 1 card remaining in his hand, as we know that card's Batterskull, so Brian also just playing off the top of his deck here. And I feel like we have been here before where both players are going to be playing on an empty board and Brian's at a low life total. Last game, that favored Brian. He was able to top deck the Jace to pull himself ahead.
He's a little bit further behind in this spot than he was in the previous time. He doesn't have as much mana. He's exposed very heavily to Wasteland, and he has no way to really fix his draw or anything of the sort. Richard's also in a position where he can rip either one of his Planeswalkers and maybe seal the deal.
Right, Charmwave swings in. That'll put Brian down to 8. And Delver of Secrets was a draw for Richard. That's pretty good.
That's fine.
And I think Brian is drawing good spells again. I want to say he has Stoneforge Mystic for the turn.
I think he's going to wait on this one here. Engineer Explosive away this Tarmogoyf, and then take it from there.
He doesn't want to lose his Stoneforge, for example, to the Abrupt Decay. I mean, to the Engineer Explosives. Yeah. Richard flips Delver off Abrupt Decay. EE cracks on 2. So Brian goes to 5.
Abrupt Decay is a huge draw, though. I mean, I don't think Brian has enough time here to get this Batterskull into play unless it's cheated through the Stoneforge Mystic.
No, he absolutely does not have enough time. In fact, even if Richard had no Abrupt Decay, Brian also doesn't have enough time to do it.
Right.
He's going to need a Swords. He's going to need a kill spell. And it's going to take him even longer. Now Stoneforge is dead. So passes back. Brian's at 5. Richard has him on the ropes. He's going to force him to top deck into a kill spell, where Brian does play Red Blasts and Swords to Plowshares, and can top deck a Terminus, and can Brainstorm or top into this. So he's got a lot of plays.
For sure, although Richard's got a ton of draws himself.
And can he do it? I said Brian still chasing his first open win, and swing for 3 puts Brian down to 2. He is on the ropes, and a huge draw for Richard. Sylvan Library.
That gives him definitely the ability to refire here in the event that he's able to find a removal spell. Brian with Divining Top, he does get one more crack at it. He can play, spin, and try to find a plow.
Now, the interesting part is he does not have a plateau, so he has to decide whether he's going for plow or Pyroblast here. He can't leave up mana for both.
Well, it's 4 plows versus 2 red blasts, so Brian's going to do the math here.
And I don't think he found anything of value. And there you have it. Richard Shay, 2 games to 1, defeats Braun-Duin, and he is on to the finals.